and gentlemen, welcome to the Abington Heights School Board meeting for Wednesday, July 17th. Would everyone please rise and pledge the flag? Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. O'Day, can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Abdullah?
Here.
Mr. Azar? Mrs. Henderson?
Here.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Here.
Mrs. Karam?
Here.
Mr. Moran?
Here.
Mr. Robeson?
Here.
Mrs. Tierney?
Here.
Mr. Acker?
Here.
8 present.
May I please have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Abdullah?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
8-0.
Thank you very much. May we please have a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting of June 19th?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. On the motion, roll call, please.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdullah?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
8-0.
Are there any board reports for this evening's meeting?
Yes, Mr. Acker, I have one. The Finance Committee met on June 19th. Mr. Mirabelli presented where we stand with the $1 million in debt we took on last year. We reviewed our initial project list with an updated project list and a detailed spending update on completed projects as well as current obligations. We discussed the tangible improvements that were made in the district with this investment, as well as the grants that offset many of these project costs. It's quite an extensive list, and I will make sure to post the full list along with the minutes on board docs, but just a few highlights. We have made significant improvements in safety, like school traffic signals, security cameras and radios, upgrades to classroom doors, fences at the elementary school play areas, improvements to the curtains and doors in the high school auditorium, improvements in technology, as well as fitness and sports facilities, both equipment and upgrades to playing areas, as well as less exciting items like parking lot paving and repairs that also desperately need to be done. Following that presentation, we had David Payne from PNC Bank present. We reviewed our S&P bond rating. We are a AA rating. Highlights for how we achieve that rating were relatively strong economic metrics, good financial management policies and practices, conservative budget, stronger tax revenues and state funding, high market values in the district, stable general fund performance. We maintained our rating despite our recent approval of $100 million in debt for facilities due to robust long-term strategic planning. So that was a pretty positive outlook and a great compliment to Mr. Mirabelli's work with the district and Dr. Schaefer's leadership. God bless you. And I will spare you the intricacies of how the bond debt is marketed and structured, but Mr. Payne did give us a very interesting and detailed overview so that we are well versed in the process. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other board reports? Okay, let's move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Schaefer?
I do not have a report tonight.
Oh my gosh.
Being
Okay.
It's July.
It's July. Yep. All right. Nothing about fireworks on July 4th or anything like
That's right.
that.
We love July.
In that case, let's move on to public comment. Is there anyone that would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, let's move on to the action and discussion items. The first being the treasurer's report. Mrs. Karam, you're back on.
Okay. We began the month with a cash balance of $20,147,906.07. We took in $3,370,197.66 in revenues. Our net disbursements were $5,554,892.79 for a cash balance of $17,963,210.94. Again, the full treasurer's report is available on board docs.
Perfect, thank you very much. May I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report and the bills report?
So moved.
Second.
On the motion?
Yeah, I do have a question. If you scroll down to the capital reserve fund, construction bond fund, is the disbursements, the transfer of capital reserve fund of $97,227. Is that going to be a monthly? Are we transferring that back into the capital reserve?
Can you say that again? Yeah, so I will double check with Jim. However, the board did approve another account after working with our accountants and our attorneys. We have to have a separate account. So I'll check with Jim on the specifics of that.
It looks like that we borrowed capital reserve funds and we're reimbursing the fund.
Oh, so the board did vote, and I will double check on this one. The board did vote and approve a reimbursement, a look-back clause. So, for instance, we were paying our architects, so if we had invoices come in, because of the look-back clause, we could pay out of our capital reserve, and then we would reimburse once we got the bond. Yeah, I'll double check with Jim, but yeah, there's several things that we'd need to reimburse, because the money didn't get deposited until late June.
Okay,
So-
thank you. That's
So
what I thought.
theoretically, we should see those funds going back to the capital reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Hildebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes,
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
8-0.
Mr. Ackert, asks that the board consider a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
yes,
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
8-0.
Mr. Ackert, asks that the board consider a motion to approve the July 2023 volunteer list.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
yes,
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr.
8-0.
Ackert, asks that the board consider a motion to approve the July 2024 tuition reimbursement report.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion?
I do have a question on a couple of the courses. I'm seeing bullying. Is that a mandated course that our teachers have to take? There's quite a few courses on bullying here.
Yep, no, it is not.
Anything
Yeah.
that's mandated, we do as a district. So any mandated trainings we allow for during professional development, and we pay for that through the curriculum budget. So that's above and beyond, and something that was important to our teachers for them to learn about.
Thank you.
Any other questions? On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes,
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
8-0.
Mr. Acker, I ask that the board consider a motion to approve the following textbooks to align with our newly updated curriculum.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
8-0.
Mr. Acker asks the board consider a motion to approve the settlement agreement with student 19X.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you both. On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
No.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Mr. Acker asks the board consider a motion to approve the Children's Service Center Partial Hospitalization Program and Therapeutic Educational Program along with the HIPAA confidentiality document.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdullah,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
8-0.
Okay, I don't believe there are any informational items for this evening. Is there any unfinished business?
Yeah, I do have some unfinished business. A few meetings ago, I had asked, I had inquired about the usage of our pit stadium and if there is an opportunity for us to examine more usage for this year and possibly put on a hold on a field similar to the pit until we understood what we were doing with the pit. I'd like to open up discussion on if there's been any information for the board on the pit, if we've learned if we own it, the land, is there any progress on the information we're learning on the pit?
Yeah, we've made well, first, I want to make sure that I reiterate, months ago when the board hired Rocco Valvano to engage in an exploration of the property that we're on currently right now. That is a lengthy process. Currently, we've pulled all the deeds, and as you can imagine, the deeds, which numbered 4 to 5, go back some years. And you would take a look at those deeds, and not surprisingly, there are swaths of land that we are on that we would assume that we own. And as Rocco told me, we assume nothing. So the next stage is we're just surveying. So our first step is really just identifying the property. And that's where we're currently at right now. And I think my summary of that would be that the board has committed to a 7 to 10 year project, investing upwards of $100 million to renovate all of our facilities, if not many facilities. And in order to do that, we take a look at our existing facilities and see if we can, do anything to mitigate some of the tax increases associated with paying debt service. And that's why I've kind of explored it. But, no decisions have been made regarding that. I can tell you that we are, Abington Heights there are not many districts that I know of blessed to have 2 fields. I'll use this upcoming season as an example. In many parts of Pennsylvania, due to challenges with finding referees, I mean, it is a challenge. They've started Thursday night football. So for the first time, Lackawanna County will now have Thursday night football, not because they're going to mirror the NFL, but because we have a hard time around the state finding officials. Well, that means that we're not playing on Saturday. We have to have a night game. Otherwise, it would be an away game, but we do have a stadium with lights. Also, from time to time, we have home games that fall during college testing. So the ACT falls on that this year. So we had to make an adjustment there. So, you know, that reduced the amount of time that, or events that we would use the pit this coming year. But, you know, we haven't made any decisions. There's just a exploration stage. So that would be my summary. I don't.
And so in the case where we can't play on Saturday, if we didn't have a field with lights, those games would be away games.
Yeah.
So the choice is really play it away or play it at night on the field at the high school.
We would not be playing at our current,
No, we
right,
would not
right.
be, that's my point. It'd be a home
Yeah.
game, but we would not be playing it in our district.
Do other Abington sports use the pit? Do the junior Comets use the pit any longer?
Not that I'm aware of. They would use our turf field. I mean, at least when I've been out there and observed the junior Comets playing, they've been out on the turf. Mostly, I believe, because of availability. You know, when we get a lot of rain like we do, we just don't observe it. I would observe it, but the pit can get pretty swampy. So it's really hard to hold some events that way.
I would just add, and I think I said it this last time, but I think regardless of the decision on the pit, I would still be supportive of building the new facility. I think that was, for the most part, shared all across many of the board members. But I think it's, if the pit remains, it'll probably continue to receive the same limited use that it has today, where the new facility would allow use for spring and fall sports, regardless of weather, to an expanded group, and allow for opening up of the schedule so that you're not competing with each other as much. So I think you'd see better usage either way, and I'd still be supportive even if the pit remained.
I am in total support of more facilities. I'm just looking to prioritize. We have a baseball field that I know personally, the baseball coach had to postpone or cancel his home advantage most of their games. We have a football field. We have a multi-purpose field now. I would love to use our finances first, knowing that we have this pit, for our baseball and softball field first. And then I am in total favor of another multi-purpose field. But I'm looking to just prioritize while we know we have this. But listening to the information as to the limitation offers good communication. I was not aware that Saturday is not a good day for referees. So now the refs have to be Thursday night. I would love, and I know years ago we approached Clark Summit to put lights at the pit, and we had a lot of restriction. I know in the last 3 or 4 years when I've gone to Clark Summit Borough myself, they are all in favor, but I haven't had support to get lights at the pit. So the pit is our best, largest facility right now. Is there an opportunity for possibly for girls field hockey to play at our pit? Is there an opportunity for in the spring for lacrosse to play at the pit? We have a multi-purpose field that is overused now. I would love to see the junior Comets play either at our pit or at their turf field at Hillside Park that they paid for.
So one thing as a point of clarification. I don't believe that it's not Thursday night is better than Saturday. It's that there's such limited resources that referee will be Thursday and a Saturday, or Thursday and a Friday. I mean, it's just a limited pool, so you're having to move games to, different times. And I'll talk to Enrico, and I am admittedly bird walking a little bit, but perhaps there's some people on the board that know. But our pit, while we play football on it, that doesn't mean that it meets the dimensions of some of the sports that you mentioned. Like, so for instance, soccer and field hockey and lacrosse, we couldn't have a game based on the required dimensions needed to play, which is kind of why we have like a field that we're currently building now and under contract to build now that can fit 7 sports plus, youth to come in there and use it for a variety of purposes. So,
Mrs.
I
Tierney.
also think that
Thank you.
we should really pull the individual teams. Seems to me that I'm sure there's no one on the board that would object if the lacrosse team said they wanted to play a game at the pit, or field hockey if they could be played. I think the real issue here is not, it should be, what are we doing for our students? And what options do we have for our students? And I think the fact that we have a wonderful facility like the pit that we can do football games and graduations and so on is great. We also now have turf fields that have other characteristics and allow our young athletes to play at multiple times. And I think their input is what we really ought to look at here in terms of using the pit, not having the board say, you should do that. I think we should let them make that choice.
May I add something? Mrs. Tierney, you brought up baseball a few times. In that finance committee report, we talked about our project list, and we did make $90,000 of improvements to the baseball field this year. And I remember a year ago, you mentioned when the baseball team came in, so not this past spring, but another spring previously, that your son played baseball. And you mentioned that the baseball field was in deplorable condition at that time, right? So this is an ongoing problem where we need to invest in facilities. We have taken out $100 million to do so. Sports are a small chunk of that. And as much as we would love to, my youngest plays baseball, and I don't know when I can put that new turf field for him or his buddies, depending on where he goes, when we can get to that. But we are in a position where we are taking out as much as we can afford to do so and investing it in all of our facilities as fairly as possible. And I believe softball plays on this new multi-turf field too, right? Baseball is not off the docket. It is not something that we are all ignoring and that we will never do. But I also know that these are problems that have been going on for years, and we are working to address them one by one, and this is just where we are at in this prioritization project. We only have so many dollars in that $100 million that we allotted to these fields, and part of that, part of the multi-purpose field was to enable as many kids as possible to play. So we keep revisiting the priorities, and we voted on them, and I think, one of our S&P, one of the reasons we got this great S&P rating is long-term strategic planning. We have in place where we intend to put the money for our facilities. And, I have bigger goals for our district too, right? I want to see more improvements. We talk about that middle school renovation. I'm excited to do not only 5th and 6th, or not only half the building, but the entire building, right? So I think we have big goals in front of us, and I don't want the public to understand that we are ignoring all the district's needs and all the students' needs, and we want the best for them in a way that benefits the entire community and that is sustainable and reasonable. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
And that's exactly why I'm bringing up the pit. so we can prioritize, we have a stadium here.
I think the problem is we've already voted on the contracts to do the work. The work is already in process. To put that on hold at this point in time will cause some significant extra cost on the whole project. I believe the whole board did vote on those
And I
contracts. So
thank you for answering that, because that was my question. Is it possible to put on hold? And now I've got an answer. No, we were already in progress. I've been
don't
waiting for
believe-
that answer.
I don't believe we have that.
Thank you.
I believe that was answered at the last meeting when this came up. I think the bottom line is, it was voted on unanimously. I understand your point, Mrs. Tierney. You know, you can poll the audience and ask the sports coaches. I think each sports coach would know better than any of us, but I can tell you, as a field hockey player, it's not optimal to play on the grass. Lacrosse, I have lacrosse players, there's an increase of injury when you're playing on the grass. It's not as predictable and stable as turf in many cases. And I don't know about the field dimensions, but there's a multitude of reasons that we've already discussed, and I feel like it's a moot point at this point. We've already voted, and it's time to move on.
And I think the bottom line is if those athletes said, gee, we'd like to play a game down there, I don't think anybody would stop them.
That's right. I'd love that. Thanks.
But I agree with you. I think the field condition is such that you wouldn't, you know, just from a standpoint of being an old lacrosse player, I know that balls take a big bounce on hitting divots and things like that.
And weather's a factor, so.
Yeah, so. Okay, let's move on. Any new business? May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you all.